I couldn't believe he was gone. He was 35, 6 years older than I was. Way too young to die. Then again, he didn't die a natural death. He died a horrible, miserable death on the streets of some third-world shithole, gunned down with several of the men he was trying to do business with. Turns out they weren't the respectable businessmen they had led Steve to believe they were, but high-end drug dealers trying to branch out into legitimate business. Their competition took the opportunity to eliminate them as business rivals and did a drive-by, using machine guns. 4 of them to be exact. Steve was hit 17 times, lucky shots all, and they pretty much cut him in half. If it was any consolation, he didn't suffer long, dead in minutes from loss of blood. I wondered if he thought of Jen, his beautiful wife, and their plans to start a family soon. I wondered if he had time for regret, to realize he should have been happy with what he had. Heck, he was already a millionaire many times over. Steve wasn't like that. He was obsessive, always looking for the ultimate deal, the one that would give him rock star status among his peers. He really thought this was it. He talked it over with me, as he had a habit of doing on all his deals. We were usually on his boat, fishing, just us. I'd look at him and just grin. You really expect an intelligent answer? Shit, I don't understand what you're talking about most of the time. This stuff is giving me a headache. Now, are you out here to get Mr. Big or what? He'd grin back. Mr. Big, definitely. Hey, did I show you my new rod? It's supposed to be the best. Think it will help me any? Oh, and I know you don't care or understand what I'm saying. It just helps me to say it out loud. Can't do that in the office. The walls have ears. I had just sigh. He'd fool with the rod that cost probably a third of my yearly income, get aggravated, toss it down, and pick up the old 5.5-foot rod with the almost antique Zebco 33 I'd given him and start catching fish. In the time I'd known him, he'd probably spent 10 grand on fishing equipment, not counting the boat. He never listened when I tried to teach him, and the fish had to just about commit suicide on his hook before he caught one, but he had a blast trying. My time with Uncle Sam had taught me there was probably no safe place to talk. Any of the boats we could see might have equipment that allowed them to hear our conversations like they were standing behind us. Not to mention hacked phones, video, and analyzing the conversation with lip readers. The opportunities were endless. I let him go, though. What he talked about had nothing to do with national security or corporate espionage, so he was probably safe. I did venture an opinion, the first ever since we'd met. You need to think about this, dude. I've been where you're going, and it ain't Paris. People there would cut your throat for your watch and shoes. Hire security while you're there and listen to them. Almost no one there is what they seem. He just laughed and tried to talk me into going with him. I politely declined. After a few hours, he gave up on Mr. Big and took consolation in Brother Bud. Jen frowned as I helped him out of his truck and into the living room, where we laid him on the couch. He was snoring in minutes. Want me to help get him into bed? Jen smiled a sad smile. Not really. Let him sleep it off there, and when he wakes up with a stiff neck and an aching back, he might think about it before he does it again. I swear, Jamie, you bring out the best and the worst in him, usually at the same time. How do you do that? I shrugged. Natural talent, I guess. Surely his other friends bring him home blasted sometimes. I didn't know how to take her answer. He doesn't have any other friends, Jamie. All the rest want something from him, or he wants something from them. With those guys, you don't just hang out. Every party is a business meeting. Every social event is just an opportunity to network. It's all about the binges, baby. That can't be true. When he's around me, we rarely talk about business. Most times it's about hunting, fishing, the wild women we have known and bedded, the ones that got away, the ones we wished had gotten away. Hot cars, hot bikes, hot boats, normal guy stuff. When he does talk business, I don't understand half of what he says anyway. And that, side Jen, is why he loves you. You could give a damn about his money, his status, or his acute business sense. All you care about is the good times you have when you're together. Plus, you don't hesitate to call him when he starts spouting junk. He loves you because you don't expect anything but friendship from him. One of the best things that ever happened to him was meeting you. She looked at him and sighed. He had told me they were supposed to have a date night. Business had been intense, and he had been neglecting her. Not a good idea, because she wasn't just smoking hot. She was blast furnace hot. She'd been a model before she stopped after their marriage. She still worked out, still kept that hot body. Men walked into doors and buildings when she walked down a street. I knew, because I'd seen it. Besides the hot body, she had a perfect face, nice smile, pouty lips, blue eyes you could get lost in. I was so tongue-tied the first 3 times I was around her I could barely talk. She finally made me do 3 shots with her and proceeded to tell me the dirtiest, nastiest jokes I'd ever heard for 30 minutes. I was laughing so hard I forgot to be shy, and we've been friends ever since. I got an idea. You own any jeans? I'd never seen her in anything but dresses and skirts. A closet full. Why? Got any boots? Cowboy boots, maybe? She grinned, for the first time. Why, Jamie? Are you getting kinky? Because if you are, I have these thigh-high black boots that go great with my leather corset and flogger. If you mean regular boots, I have them in snakeskin, ostrich skin, and plain old leather. After I stopped blushing and she stopped laughing, I asked her out. She seemed startled and asked me why. Because, Jen, you need to get out and let go. Let Sleeping Beauty lie, and I'll take you to a world you've never experienced before. She stopped smiling, and I rushed to explain. I was going out tonight, a little club that I bet you'd love. You're a very beautiful woman, and I'm sure 99% of men in this world would grovel at your feet for a chance at you. I'm in the 1% here, Jen. I don't trespass and I respect boundaries. All I'm offering you is a chance to have fun. Let your hair down. Maybe shake that fantastic rump of yours. I'll watch over you. I'll even take pictures, and you can rub it in when he's nursing his hangover. You seemed down, and I thought I'd offer. Will there be beer and rednecks? Maybe a bar fight or 2? The first 2 are a definite. No to the rest. You don't cause problems in that place. It's very painful if you do. Rough up a woman and the bouncers would have to fight through a crowd just to get to the guy. By the time they get there, about all they have to do is take out the trash. It's a friendly couples-oriented place, and they like to keep it that way. Just thought I'd offer. I rose from the kitchen table and rinsed my coffee cup before placing it on the counter. Jen always joked that with my habit of neatness, I'd make a fine wife someday. We'll take the Jag. We'll take the truck. If you took that Jag, every good old boy in the place would have to drool on it. Now, jeans and a nice shirt. And Jen, could you turn the heat down a little? The way you look right now, I'd get my bum kicked a dozen times trying to protect you. She stuck her tongue out and told me to wait 10 minutes. I told her I needed to go home and have a shower to get the fish smell off me and get some clean clothes. She grabbed my hand and led me to the master bedroom, something that made me very uncomfortable. Stand here. She walked into his closet, a 12 by 12 room stuffed to the gills. Hers was twice as big. I heard her opening drawers, and she came back with jeans, a western shirt, and anaconda skin boots. I was led down the hall to a guest room with a large bathroom. Here you go. He bought those things new a year ago, right after he met you, and has never worn them. I didn't bring you any boxers, so it's commando for you, big boy. Now clean up and meet me downstairs in 20 minutes. Steve and I were exactly the same size, down to shoes. The only difference between us was height. He was half an inch taller. Same hair, same eyes. People thought we were brothers most of the time. I showered, enjoying the multiple shower heads, shaved with the kit I found under the counter, and dressed. I had to admit I looked pretty good, for me. Well, they say clothes make the man. If she tried to tone it down, it didn't work. Those jeans looked so tight I was afraid if she sneezed she'd blow every seam. A western shirt, pale pink to match her lipstick. Her mane of curls were pulled back into something I think was supposed to be a ponytail, but looked like a sexy mess. She had a white Stetson in her hands and bright red boots on her feet. How do I look? She asked as she twirled. Trouble. You look like trouble. She smirked. Exactly the look I was going for. Now come on. We checked on Steve, who was now hugging a pillow and snoring. Jen wrote him a note and placed it on the coffee table beside a bottle of water and 3 Tylenol. We took his truck, since mine was still at the marina. It was a brand new shiny Z71 4-door 4-wheel drive hunk of pearl white and gleaming chrome. Well, I thought, as I drove to the bar, at least it was a truck. We arrived 40 minutes later at the barn. A huge building designed to look like, take a guess here, a barn. Almost everyone outside ogled the truck, but when I got out and helped Jen step down, every guy immediately thought, "What truck?" and ogled Jen. She knew it and used to the attention, strutted into the place like she owned it. She had a death grip on my arm, so maybe she wasn't as confident as she let on. There is no other way to describe it. When we went through the door, everything stopped and people just looked. The band hadn't started yet, and the place, usually buzzing, went quiet. I just grinned and kept walking, waving to Mary to bring me a pitcher. It wasn't 3 minutes until she was there. She poured the beer for Jen, then ran mine all over the table while looking at her. I took her arm gently and stopped the flow. She looked down, flamed red, and started apologizing. Jen patted her arm. "Don't worry about it, honey. I was the same way the first time I saw Jamie." Mary looked from her to me, mumbled something, and walked off, running into 2 tables before she made it back to the bar. I grinned. "Watch out, Jen. Mary is a switch hitter, and her on-base average is pretty high." Jen laughed. "She's out of luck, then." I quit playing on both teams when I graduated from college. It was my turn to choke on the beer. I saw the friends I was supposed to meet and waved them over, making the introductions. It took 45 minutes and 3 beers before they relaxed, and by then Jen had them so charmed they would have killed for her. I'd seen her work her magic before, so I just sat back and enjoyed the ride. Then the band started up, and I grabbed her, hustling her to the floor for a 2-step. It took her about 30 seconds to catch on. I learned she held a college degree in dance. That song rolled over into a line dance, followed by the cowboy cha-cha. By then I was out of breath and dragged her back to the table, the pout obvious on her face. I grabbed Greg. "I'm tagging out, brother. See if you can keep up." She was pulling him out of his chair before he knew what happened. 30 minutes later, she brought him back, huffing and puffing like he was about to have a heart attack. She actually sat and had a beer. 10 minutes later, the band played a really slow song. It was a favorite with the crowd, and they laughingly called it the Snuggle Special. She was out of her chair and tugging, so I went along. It was probably one of the most erotic things I'd ever experienced, and she had no idea. She molded to me. No dead space was allowed, swaying her sensuous body against me. The inevitable happened, and I tried to pull back. She looked surprised, then grinned and molded tighter. I was in a daze when the song stopped, and it took her a while to get me to let her go. When I did, I instantly flamed red and took off to the bathroom, washing my face and arms with the coldest water I could get, trying to calm down. By the time I was back, she had Greg on the floor. I watched as she twirled and swayed to the music, her ballet training showing through. Poetry in motion was just a term to me until then. Then Barb tried to ruin the mood by getting catty. Jamie, you naughty boy. I thought you said you would never hook up with anyone married." Of course, what man could resist that? She was staring daggers at Jen. Barb had been a spectacular woman, before 4 kids and 3 divorces. She was only 34, and with the right makeup and lighting, she was still attractive. Not so much in the light of day. She decided I would be lucky number 4 and made a run at me while she was still with number 3. I didn't tell her the thought of being intimate with her was enough to make my skin crawl. They didn't make condoms that strong. I let her down easy, stroking her ego by telling her as wonderful as the offer was, I was going to pass. I had a hard and firm rule about married women: leave them alone. When 3 finally caught her and kicked her to the curb, she had been hanging around the clubs, looking. She was getting child support from 3 different dads and had won a little cash in the last divorce. My opinion was he finally just decided to pay her to leave him alone. So she didn't work, living off her exes. It's not easy, but it can be done, Barb. Her husband is one of my best friends in this world, and I would never do anything to make him think less of me. He wasn't available, and Jen wanted to go out. So here we are. It's just harmless fun to her, and she's having a really good time. Have you once seen her do anything inappropriate? She's either at the table or on the dance floor in plain sight. The guys she's danced with will have a tale to tell for the rest of their lives, holding a woman voted fourth most beautiful in the world at one time. Bullshit. I've seen the way she looks at you, the way you look at her when she's not watching. She's infatuated, and you're in love. Maybe so, Barb, but say I did love her? So what? She doesn't love me, and even if she did, she's so far out of reach, I might as well try to grab the sun. I'm just grateful she's my friend. and that her husband trusts us both. Think hard, Barb. Try to remember trust and being worthy of it. It's been a while, I'd wager, since any woman would trust you around her husband or him around you. You've had, I'm assuming, the total trust and love of 3 men already. How's that working out for you? This is the only time I'm going to say this, Barb, and after that you're on your own. Time to change your spots, reevaluate where you are in your life, and change. You'll never be happy or make anyone else happy until you do. You're still attractive under that inch of makeup. Get out of the bars and wash that shit off. Show the world your real face, and you might find a man who loves looking at it. End of lecture. She stared as she got pale, red, then pale again. Then she surprised me by crying. Little tears at first, then huge drops, followed by racking sobs. I didn't know what to do, and it hurt me to think I caused her pain, so I hugged her, which made the tears bigger. I patted her back until she went down to soft sniffles. I didn't see it, but Jen had come back. She immediately dug a large wad of tissues out of her purse and gently started cleaning her face while the sniffles stopped. Then she surprised everyone by taking her hand and leading her to the restroom, taking half the women at the tables with her. Jen, thanks to her modeling career, knew quite a bit about makeup. When she reappeared with Barb, the transformation was amazing. Gone were the hard lines and thick makeup. She had makeup on, but it was subtle, flattering instead of hiding. Her hair was different, with a softer, more natural look. I noticed her shirt was buttoned up. The first time in forever, she wasn't flaunting cleavage in your face. Oh, the top 2 buttons were still undone, giving tantalizing hints instead blatant advertising. It didn't take long for the guys to notice. A lot of them didn't realize who she was until they were right in front of her. Men who had walked right by her in the past suddenly found themselves asking her to dance, and for the first time since I'd known her, she said no, a lot. It took me a second before I realized when someone asked her to dance, she would look at Jen and say yes or no according to her expression. We wrapped up the night on a high note and watched as Barb left with her female friends and not with a random hookup. I just drove, listening to Jen's contented humming. When she was really happy, she hummed without realizing it. We drove up to her mansion, punched the code into the keypad, and I parked the truck in the garage. It was 2 in the morning, and she told me in no uncertain terms I was spending the night. I'd been up almost 20 hours by then, and it sounded like a great idea. We managed to wake Steve enough to get him into bed. Then I went into the guest room and crashed. It was 10 before I woke up. I found Jen and Steve at the kitchen table, drinking coffee. Jen looked just as gorgeous as ever, and Steve still looked a little green around the gills. I grinned. Man, am I ever hungry? I think I'll make some breakfast. Red-hot sausage, eggs with peppers and onions, covered in hot sauce. Better yet, I'll make my famous breakfast chili and pour it over the eggs and potatoes. Greasy, fried potatoes, if they're not dripping when you serve them, you've done it wrong. And the eggs have to be runny, so the hot chili can finish cooking them and soak the flavor in. How about a big bowl, Steve? You can wash it down with a Bloody Mary, with a few extra shots of Tabasco sauce. My mouth is watering just thinking about it. Steve got progressively greener, until he jumped up and ran to the bathroom. I yelled at his retreating back. Redneck wisdom here, Steve. Just because you bring a case of beer doesn't mean you have to drink a case of beer. Now, how about breakfast? Jen swatted me on the arm, grinned, and then toasted bagels with jams and cream cheese. It almost made Steve go back to the bathroom. I probably drank 4 cups of coffee. They bought the best and had a maker designed by NASA. I think it even factored in barometric pressure while it brewed. Steve was back on the couch again when Jen took me back to my truck. I had a great time last night. Thank you. It's been so long since I left the house for an evening that didn't have an agenda other than having fun. I envy you. Why? Because I live a simple life. I probably make in a year what Steve makes in 2 or 3 days. I have to worry about bills, paying a mortgage and a car payment, wondering if my job will hold up or if I'll be out on the streets if there's a downturn in the economy. If Steve stopped bringing in money today, you could still live the same lifestyle you have right now for the rest of your life. Like the guy said, money won't buy you happiness, but it will buy you the best brand of misery. You think I care about any of that? I made enough off modeling that I'd never have to worry about what Steve has. I quit modeling with one goal, To find a good man and have a family. I'm trying to get Steve to start a family, and for 3 years in a row he's said maybe next year. My clock is ticking, honey. I'm not getting any younger. Really? Are you even 30 yet? Relax, Jen. You have all the time in the world. Believe it or not, that was the first conversation I remembered when I found out he had died. No one notified me. I heard it on the nightly news like everyone else. I drove straight over, only to find the place full of people I didn't know. The a-hole who answered the door didn't want to let me in, so I straight-armed him into the wall, walking by as he sank to the floor. I found Jen in the living room, surrounded by 3 of her college friends, probably the only real friends she had in the whole house. She was sitting there, staring blankly, numb from grief, no doubt. When she looked at me, she wailed and held out her arms. I soon had her on my lap while she cried like a baby, her friends petting her. The wails subsided to sobs, then sniffles, and then she was out. Her friends gave me a look of gratitude. I knew one. I'd met her at their house, and we'd gotten along to the point she asked me to escort her to an awards dinner. Jen fussed over me like a mother over a 13-year-old. She bought me a new suit, shirt, tie, shoes, and sent me to her stylist. I probably looked the best I was ever going to in my life when I met her at their house. I was told in no uncertain terms that I was to drive the Mercedes and be a perfect gentleman. Sandy grinned as Jen gave me my instructions. Not too perfect, Jen. I've never encountered a real live redneck. I've heard they can be lots of fun. I flamed red and Jen had an expression I couldn't read on her face. We had a really good time. Sandy was a lawyer, a very, very good lawyer, as it turned out. The award was for a pro bono case she had won, getting a man who had served 7 years out of jail by proving his innocence. She was now representing the guy in a civil suit against the police department and the DA who had convicted him, proving evidence tampering and outright lies on the witness stand. They were trying to settle for $500,000. Sandy told them they would accept no less than $3 million. They later settled for $2.2 million. She was smart enough to get it put into payments, $220,000 a year for 10 years. It was enough to set him up in life if he was careful, but it wouldn't bring back the 7 years he lost, or his family. His wife had divorced him, taken their daughter, and moved across the state, saying she didn't feel safe exposing their daughter to his lifestyle. She'd remarried and was on the verge of divorce. Sandy got him scheduled visitation and 1 weekend a month for then. She talked him into scheduling counseling sessions for him and his daughter at first, to get them used to each other. It would be rough, but she hoped they'd reconnect. They did, to the point that she petitioned to live with him when her mother's second marriage cratered. In a surprising move, he brought her mother back to town, got her a nice apartment, and supported her until she could provide for herself. He said it was to make up for the child support he should have paid. She hinted, but he turned her down. She'd been pretty abusive in the papers and had refused to let his daughter visit him in prison. Too much water under the bridge. Instead of going to work, he enrolled in community college, then transferred to state, getting a degree in engineering. He and his daughter shared an apartment the last year. She was a freshman at the same school. I had a really good time at the awards dinner and enjoyed the dancing afterwards. Jen had to teach me to dance in the style expected, and I'm sure she nursed a few bruised toes the first few lessons. I was dressed well enough to fit in, and when asked, I told them I was in construction management, not elaborating. I was actually a crew foreman and made decent money for what I did. I even had a degree in construction management, courtesy of the GI Bill. My bosses were impressed enough to promise the next management position that came available. I was talking to one lawyer I had hit it off with, and Sandy was mingling. Networking, I guess, is the correct term. I heard her say, really loudly, and looked over in time to see her jerk her hand away from a guy. I casually walked over, surprising her by kissing her on the cheek. "Hi, hon. Enjoying the evening?" "I was," she said darkly, eyeing the guy in front of her. He looked at me and grinned. He had to be 6'5" or better and weigh over 250. He had muscles, but I was pretty sure they were gym muscles. I was 5'10", weighed 170, and my muscles were earned through hard work. I could see the dismissal in his eyes. I'd seen guys like him a lot, and one thing the military taught me was how to compensate for size. I grinned back. "You want to trade insults? Beat on your chest a bit, maybe howl?" I think in the interest of time conservation we should skip the preliminaries and go straight to your bum kicking. I've faced pretty boys like you before, and one thing I've always done, win or lose, is make sure they'll never be as pretty as they were before we started. Then again, you look like you can afford a good cosmetic surgeon. So, you want to tangle, or just tuck your tail and walk away? He started to bluster, and I held up a hand. Yes or no, walk or fight. Say anything else, and I will perceive it as a signal to start. He stuttered a few seconds, looked around wildly, but no one seemed interested in backing him, and many seemed to enjoy the thought of watching him get his bum kicked. He deflated like a balloon and walked away. Sandy looked at me like I had grown 2 heads before grinning. You've destroyed him. You understand that? He'll never be perceived as an alpha male by anyone who witnessed what just happened, and they'll be more than eager to spread the story. His power base is gone, and he'll never get it back. At least not here. I'll bet you anything he'll leave the firm in less than 3 months. I shrugged. If it wasn't me, sooner or later it would have been someone else. Want to dance? She did. It turns out lawyers make pretty good lovers. She was on me like a cat in heat the moment we pulled away from the curb. 3 blocks later, she shrugged out of the top of her dress. We managed to make it to her garage, where I dragged her out, bent her over the hood, and had a quickie. I probably didn't last 5 minutes, but it was a very intense 5 minutes. So I grabbed her, carrying her into her house. I was going to put her on the couch, but she revived enough to tell me where the bedroom was. I stood her up and she shrugged, the dress falling bunched to the floor. I didn't know it at the time, but we destroyed a $3,000 designer dress. We went to the bedroom and had amazing sex. I really like you, honey. I'd love to see you again, but I want you to know that right now my career comes first. I won't be looking for anyone to share my life until I make partner, and that's a few years down the line. Think you can live with that? I think I surprised her. I can understand that. You're attractive, great in the sack, and have a nice personality, but I have to be honest. I'm not looking for the house with the picket fence right now. We can still be friends if you like. She grinned. Make that friends with benefits, and you have a deal. Jen was right about you. I asked, and she just grinned, telling me to get it from Jen. Jen was a little off for a while, but after a long talk with her friend, she was back to her sunny self. Sandy gave a glowing report of the date. I'm glad you're smart enough to keep from getting serious. Sandy's not the one for you. I was sort of depressed. I don't think there's a one out there for me, Jen. Every time I meet someone, I use you as a measuring stick, and they all fall short. She went red and then seemed to glow while Steve laughed. You're ruined then. My wife is one of a kind, the gold standard of women in this world. Jen really glowed then, and I left, knowing they would be making love before my truck left the driveway. I wasn't jealous, but I did reflect that if he felt that way, he shouldn't neglect her as much. Sandy stood with her friends and motioned for me to follow. I carried her to her bedroom, and they turned down the sheets. I laid her down gently, touching her cheek before I left the room. At least one of her friends stayed with her all night. I went back into the living room, aghast at the sight before me. Somewhere along the line, it started turning into a party. They'd found the liquor cabinet and were going at it pretty hard. I held it together until they turned music on, increasing the volume until it was almost blasting. Sandy came back in and looked at me, knowing what I was thinking. Who are these a-holes? A lot are Steve's business associates, here to stake a claim and begin picking the bones. Some are from her modeling days, and a few of them are going to try to lure her back. The rest are just along for the ride. They'll use her until she comes to her senses, then drift away to another victim. You're her lawyer of record, right? I am. And Janice, she's a doctor, if I remember correctly? That's true, she said as she started smiling, realizing where I was going. Then go ask her, in her professional opinion, if this is a good environment for Jen right now. We've already talked about it. It's not. But while we're all intelligent professional women, there's little we can do with this pack of a-holes. We're thinking of hiring security. I stood. Well, I'm not a woman and have never been known for my smarts. Maybe I can save you a few bucks. I got their attention when I turned off the music. On behalf of Jen and Steve, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Jen's doctor has prescribed bed rest and quiet, so if you wouldn't mind, honor her wishes and leave. You can all come back later after she's had time to process. I'm sure she would appreciate it. Who the hell are you, a hole? Before I could speak, Sandy was in his face. He's probably the only male in here who actually cares about Jenny. Leave her in peace. If not, well, I'll just have to turn my security consultant loose on you. He holds 2 black belts and has been charged with murder twice, but I got it changed to justifiable homicide because he was protecting a client both times. Want to test his limits? None of what she said was true, but they didn't know that. They left, grumbling among themselves until it was just me, Janice, Sandy, Melody, and Jen. Janice told us she had given Jen a slight sedative, and she'd probably sleep the night through. She turned to me. Jamie, can you stay? Melody will be here, but we'd feel a lot better if you stayed with her. Jen's going to be shaky for quite a while, and she'll need friends around her. I ended up staying for 4 days, moving into the 2-bedroom guest cottage they had while the women stayed in the house. There was a huge turnout for his funeral, and she held my arm in a death grip, only letting go when I did my pallbearer duties. I sat beside her while the preacher did the graveside service. She cried herself out by then and sat numbly as he droned on. The vultures had decided that with me around, they'd never be able to advance their agendas, so they left us in peace and we returned to a pretty quiet house. Maybe 20 people, but they were all fond of Jen. I left the next day after Melody and Sandy assured me they would not leave her alone for a while. I didn't see her again until I was summoned to her house for the reading of the will. It seems Steve had left me a little something. She was 10 pounds lighter and still a little pale, but she smiled when she hugged me. Jen, naturally, got everything except for a few personal items he wanted me to have. All his fishing equipment, his boat, and his truck. He also left me a letter that I read when I got home. Man, if you're reading this, then I'm dead. That sucks. I'm hoping you're in your 60s when you get this, but I got a feeling that if you're getting what I wanted you to have, it's a lot earlier. I can't tell you what you meant to me. For the first time in my life, I had a friend. A friend that didn't give a damn about how much I had or what I could do for him, but a guy who just wanted to hang out, maybe fish and have a few beers. Think of me when you're kicked back on the boat, reeling in a monster I could only dream about, and raise a beer in my memory now and then. One more thing. I want you to keep an eye on Jen. I should have been a better husband, but she was still the love of my life. Don't let her do anything foolish while she gets herself back together. I like to think if anything ever happened to me, she'd turn to you. If she does and gets serious, name the first son Steve. Just kidding, dude, but stranger things have happened and I know you'd be good for her. Think about it. Ever your friend, Steve. I was a little surprised when a delivery van pulled into my driveway a week later. The guy had a full load and a note. Jamie, I know you're not expecting this and probably wouldn't take it if you had a choice, but I want you to have them and I'm taking the coward's way out. I'm leaving for a while. I just can't take another night of rambling around in that big empty house. I'll return, but I can't tell you when. These are Steve's clothes. They'll fit you like a glove, and they're too good to waste. I doubt seriously you'll wear more than 2 of the suits for the rest of your life, but it will be nice to have that option. The jeans and the rest of the casual clothes will come in handy, as well as the boots. Please don't be offended. I know he would have wanted you to have them if he'd have thought that far ahead. Wear them in good faith, remembering the man who was your friend. Remember, too, that I was also your friend and hope you let me continue to be. Love you, Jen. I let the stuff sit in my spare bedroom for a few weeks before I could work up the energy to start going through them. Who the hell needs 28 suits? In the end, I kept 8, highly expensive and damn good looking. The rest I donated. Sure, some bargain hunter would freak when they saw them. I kept most of the jeans and casual clothes, and all 36 pair of the shoes and boots. Each pair probably cost more than I could make in a month. I'd never have to buy shoes again. Life went on. I'd fish once in a while, always feeling guilty when I used the boat and truck. I hardly ever drove the truck because it was just too nice to have around construction sites. I'd go out on the boat, look through the expensive gear, but most often I used the old Zebco rig I had given him. I still remembered the night I met him. I didn't have a boat, so I fished from the bank. I was at a hot spot, right below the discharge chute of a power plant. A lot of stuff got caught up in the turbulence and came out the other end ground up. It was catfish heaven. I'd already decided to call it a night at 11. I'd caught 4 pretty decent fish and a 20-pound monster, enough to keep me in catfish for months. Steve came slowly down the path, stumbling in the dark. You okay, man? I could tell he was a little buzzed. Yeah, maybe. My car quit on me a little ways back and I guess I took a wrong turn somewhere. To top that off, my phone is dead. Can you call an Uber and tell them where to pick me up? I'll do it, but we have to get up a little higher for good reception. Why don't you sit here while I square away my gear, and I'll make the call when we get up top. Shouldn't take me long. He sat watching as I reeled in my lines. It seemed that one catfish was determined to commit suicide and hit just as I was reeling in the last line. Before I knew it, Steve was right beside me, watching in awe. Here, I said, grinning. Reel him up for me. He snatched the rod, but admitted he had no idea what to do. Keep the line tight so he can't spit the hook out. Just keep reeling, and when his head comes out of the water, I'll scoop him up with the net. It was a pretty nice cat, 10 pounds at least. I'll never forget the look on his face. Wow, I've always wanted to catch a fish. He'd never fished before? What planet did this guy live on? He helped me carry my stuff back to the truck, and then we went to look at his car. It was a BMW, all chrome and gleaming paint. I'll call tomorrow and get it towed. No, you'll need to call them right now and get them over here. Look around you. We're in the middle of nowhere. If a couple of good old boys were to see this sitting here, the only thing left tomorrow would be the frame, maybe. Call them now. I'll have to look someone up. Can I use your phone? I hit speed dial. Wilbur? Yeah, I know it's late, but I got a hot one. A BMW, dead, at the end of Lookout Point. Can you come and get it? We'll wait. I had it on speaker. How the hell did a Beamer get way out there? I think the guy got lost. Give me 20 minutes. We waited, talking while he got there. It was dark, there were no lights anywhere, and 10 minutes later a truck pulled up and 3 guys got out. They looked around and saw my truck, but couldn't see us, thinking it was some guy fishing. They were tugging on the door handles when I turned my lights on. Move on, boys. Grab your rods and go fishing. They're biting pretty good. It was obvious they'd been drinking pretty hard, and one guy told me to mind my own business, or they'd mind it for me. I got out, holding the Taurus .357 down by my side. Move on. Or what? Or I blow what you use for brains out. You ain't got no gun. I raised it and popped a round off. .357s are kind of loud, and it echoed off the lake pretty good. They almost drove off before one could get in. He ended up jumping on the bed as they went by. Steve was looking at me like I was an alien. Would you have shot them? I wouldn't have had to. Once they knew I had a weapon, all the fight went out of them. If they had been armed or forced the issue, I would have reacted accordingly. Here comes Wilbur. Wilbur got out, looked over the car, and grinned. I ain't even asking, but you need to get the undercarriage looked at before you drive it. This is a pretty rough road. He gave Steve a card with the address of his garage. I asked him where he lived as Wilbur's tail lights faded. It was less than 20 miles away. He was going to call his wife because he didn't think he could get an Uber in that area. He was probably right. There's no need to get your wife out of the bed at this time at night. I'll take you home. It's kind of on my way. He sat quietly for most of the ride. His drive was a long, winding one that led through trees before it stopped in what could only be called a mansion. You live here? Yeah, I bought it for my wife last year. Care to come in? I don't think so. I'm dirty and I smell like livers, worms, and catfish. Probably not an aroma your wife would appreciate at this time of night. Call Wilbur in the morning. He's ASE certified and most of his business is Mercedes and Autos. He could probably fix anything wrong with your car. I waited until he got on his porch before he left. Wilbur checked his car over, and the only damage he could find was a bent tie rod. Steve had him fix it and pumped him for information about me when he picked it up. Wilbur told me what he said. Jamie's a good guy, Mr. Rodham, and he's probably the best fisherman I've ever seen. He can be on the bank with 20 anglers and be the only one catching anything. When the local fire department needs fish for a fry, they call him. He's usually good for 50 pounds or more. Steve was sitting in my driveway when I got home from work 3 days later. He got out, looking embarrassed. Can I talk to you for a minute? I have a business proposition. Curious, I brought him in, gave him a glass of tea. After a few minutes of spitting and sputtering, it came out. I've always wanted to learn how to fish. I'm more than willing to pay if you'll teach me. I can make it worth your while. I thought about it for a few minutes. I could tell he was sincere. All right, Be here at 7 Friday night and we'll spend a few hours catfishing. You get the hang of that and we'll branch out a base in crappie. I won't charge you anything past the price of the bait and a few beers, so don't insult me with offers to pay. Every man needs to know how to fish. He was so excited he could barely talk. It took about a month before he wanted me to follow him home so he could introduce me to his wife. I had no idea what his wife looked like, but I figured with the kind of money he had, she'd be hot. For once in my life, I got something right. I didn't follow fashion magazines, so I had no idea who she was. I just knew she was probably the most attractive woman I'd even seen. She smiled and tried to shake my hand, but I snatched it back. Sorry, ma'am, but I got fish bait on my hands, and it is not a feel or smell I'd recommend to a lady. She just stared for a minute before she grinned. Well then, I insist you come in and wash up, so I can greet a new friend properly. I did everything but take a bath in that sink. My urge to not offend her almost paralyzing. I surprised her again when I wouldn't sit on her couch, so she moved us to the kitchen table. I felt a little more relaxed. Where I grew up, friends never went to the front door, hardly ever made it out of the kitchen because there was always a pot on and something fresh out of the oven just begging for an opinion, and never overstayed their welcome. After we got to know each other, and I told her about the way I was raised, she grinned. After that, the first thing she did when she knew I was coming was get the coffee ready, turning it on when I came in the door. They kind of adopted me, but I remembered my upbringing and never abused their friendship or stayed over long. Jen was a hell of a woman, but when we met she had no idea what to do in a kitchen. They had a maid who did most of their cooking when they were home. They ate out a lot, mostly business dinners with the people Steve dealt with. I brought them a pecan pound cake, and they raved about it. Steve ate 3 pieces and Jen ate 2. Shocked didn't even begin to describe the look on their faces when I told them I baked it. My mother taught me. It's a family secret going back to my great-grandmother, so don't ask for the recipe. I did end up teaching her how to bake, starting with simple things like banana nut bread and pineapple upside-down cake. She got hooked on Pinterest and YouTube websites and practiced a lot. It got so bad that Steve gained 5 pounds before he begged her to stop. I diverted her by saying there was always a church or civic organization around that was having a bake sale, and they would appreciate anything she was willing to share. That turned out to be a case of exchanging demons, because if she left with 2 cakes, she'd come home with 3. She also made a lot of friends in the community and joined 1 or 2 civic organizations she thought had merit. Oddly enough, many of their meetings ended up held at her house. Jen was happy, saying it gave her something to do while Steve traveled or worked. The fire department was her favorite, and she worked tirelessly to better the station. She donated money, of course, but more valuable was the time she gave. Her local department ended up being one of the best equipped and trained in the state. The only time she flaunted her money was when she read an article saying that cancer was on a meteoric rise in firemen because of fumes and residue from the new materials builders were using. Jen consulted experts and had a modified hazmat shower built and paid for a truck to haul it. She organized the volunteers who trained to set it up and balance the soaps and chemicals needed to decontaminate suits and equipment. Many walked through the shower in full gear before stripping it off and going through it again. Departments from all over the country came to observe the procedure. They were horribly expensive and beyond the means of most volunteer departments, so Jen founded a charity to fund them and served as the face and first chairman. She often made personal appearances across the country to drum up support. She won awards that she accepted with thanks but rarely talked about, preferring for the focus stay on the mission. I escorted her to a couple of functions when Steve was traveling, and most thought I was her husband. She rarely corrected them and giggled about it later. You and Steve look so much alike that it's a common mistake, especially if they've been drinking. Just go with it. When it was time for the annual Christmas parade, our small town insisted she serve as Grand Marshal to honor her for her efforts. She ended up riding on top of an antique fire engine, a 1921 American La France. As a tribute, 41 stations sent a truck. It was the biggest Christmas parade ever held in the town. Jen wanted me to ride with her, but I refused. This is your moment, Jen. They want to honor you, so accept it in the spirit it was given. The applause rippled through the town as she passed, and she had tears in her eyes by the time it was over. She told me later of all the acclaim she'd gotten while she modeled. All of it together meant less than what she was given that cold December afternoon. She had been gone for 5 months. She briefly returned to modeling, did a couple of guest appearances on fashion shows, even sat in as a substitute judge for 3 weeks. Then she just disappeared off the face of the earth. I tried calling her a couple of times, but the number had been changed. I called Sandy and she was in the same boat. She's processing, honey. She thought her life was set. Did you know she was going to have 2 bedrooms decorated for the children she hoped to have? One for a little boy, the other for a girl. Unless she remarries pretty soon, that dream will fade. She's done this before. When her aunt, a woman who practically raised her, passed suddenly, she went off the grid then. She was gone for 6 weeks and then she just showed up and carried on like she hadn't been gone and refused to talk about where she had been. Don't worry, Jamie. She'll show back up sooner or later. Remember, her dream house is here. I doubted the validity of that when I saw the house featured on the cover of a real estate magazine. It was priced at $2.2 million. I heard it sold in a week for $2.6, the object of a bidding war between 3 couples. After 9 months, I had reconciled myself to the fact that she was now just a pleasant memory. It was Saturday, and I was in my shop doing what I loved best. Besides construction management, I held a degree in furniture design. I bought my house partially because it had a large workshop out back, a 24 by 36 metal building. I had a lot of tools, and now that I had room, I bought equipment I hadn't been able to use until then. I had a huge lathe, a steam vat designed to soften wood for bending, a planer capable of working a 30-inch board. In short, I had almost everything a professional furniture maker needed to produce a quality product. I had another shed that held lumber that stayed packed. I had a lot of oak, some pecan, a few black walnut logs, some cedar, even a bit of holly. At that particular moment, I was making a rocking chair for a friend. She was vertically challenged, as she liked to put it. Her adult height was 4 feet 6 inches, and she was the tallest of her siblings. This chair was designed for optimal comfort for her size, somewhere between a child's chair and a full size. I was drum sanding the edges of the seat when I felt the door open. I didn't look up. Most of my friends and neighbors knew what I did most Saturdays, so if they wanted something or stopped by to say hi, they knew to come to the shop first. I finished sanding the bottom and looked up, almost dropping it when I saw who it was. She looked older. She was 15 pounds thinner, and she didn't need to lose weight. Her eyes were sad, but they changed when I looked up. The eyes matched her smile. Instead of hello, her first words surprised me. How come I never knew you made furniture? It never came up in conversation. Besides, it's just a hobby. I'd love to do it full-time, but I'm not sure I could support myself. I'd have to charge some pretty high prices, and I don't think most people could afford it. I know lots of people who would love to have custom-made furniture and wouldn't bat an eye at the price if it was of good quality. You should have let me help you. I struggled for a moment trying to frame my answer in a way she could understand it. Yeah.
No.
You were my friends, Jen, not some business opportunity. If I'd have come to you, I'd have been just like all the rest of the a-holes you and Steve had to deal with. You would have always wondered if I was truly your friend or just someone I needed to use. So I didn't bring it up. Steve never knew. If I had told him, he would have hounded me with suggestions like the one you just gave. You were worth more to me as friends, do you understand? Tears started, and that's why we loved you. I couldn't keep a little bitterness out of my voice. Yeah, I could tell that from all the calls and visits I got from you. I knew you wouldn't understand. I had to leave. After a few days, rattling around in that big old house was just too much. Plus, every time I saw you, it reminded me of Steve. I tried going back to my old life, but that got stale pretty quick. I'd forgotten how shallow and calculating most of those people were. I can understand that, but you didn't call Sandy or any of your oldest friends. Think they liked being shut out of your life? If you're going to be back for more than a few days, you need to give them a call and try to mend fences. What she'd done hit her, and she cried harder. I shut down my machinery knowing there would be no more work that day and took her into the house, making coffee and getting out the pecan pound cake I'd made the day before. She ate 2 pieces before she started making phone calls. Sandy and the rest of the girls showed up 90 minutes later, kissed me on the cheek, and threw me out of the house. I piddled around before deciding to light my grill. I'd marinated a bunch of leg quarters the night before, so I grilled them, a few steaks, some potatoes and ears of corn, and honey-glazed carrots with toasted pecans. The smells started getting to them, and they drifted out to my deck. My house was manufactured, because it was the most house I could get for the money, but I had modified it quite a bit and was inordinately proud of my multi-level deck with the built-in table that wrapped in a semicircle around a big oak. It was the first time any of them had been there, so they wandered around, checking out my koi pond, complete with a little island that held a large Japanese lantern, and admiring a vegetable garden that looked laid out with military precision. They were surprised one whole section was nothing but flowers. I had sunflowers of all sizes and colors, zinnias, African daisies, different colors of cosmos, and marigolds. When I called them to eat, I was amazed. They ate like construction workers, not fashion models or professional women. They laughed about the whole roll of paper towels they had to use. Sandy sat back and let loose a very unladylike belch, which broke the whole group up. I'm thinking, Jamie, that I need to review my relationship expectations. You cook, you build furniture, and you ain't hard to look at. Everyone laughed but Jen, and she looked a little irritated. The girls caught it and grinned harder, teasing her by giving me their numbers. I looked at Melody. Aren't you married? I am, and I love him dearly. I wanted you to have my number so we could set up some training sessions for hubby. He could use a few pointers. They relaxed as twilight gathered, oohing when I switched on my party lights, especially enjoying the Japanese lantern on the little island. All the lights were designed to draw insects away from the deck. I brought out a carafe of coffee and the pecan pound cake. They groaned but managed to eat every bite of it. They all demanded the recipe. Sorry, girls, but it's a family secret. He won't even give it to me, and I begged for almost 2 years. He says it will stay in the family. Sandy looked at Jen and smirked. Well then, we'll have to get him married off to one of us to ensure a steady supply. Any volunteers? To a woman, they all turned to Jen. She was glowing but promised to do a little research. There were a lot of hugs and kisses as they left. Sandy got me off to the side. I know men are thick most of the time, so let me lay it out for you. She didn't come back for us. She came back for you. If you're not interested, let her down gently. If you are, go slow. She's still a little fragile. I was taken completely by surprise. I guess men are dense. Her? Me? She's miles above me, Sandy. She's rich, beautiful, and I'm just an average guy trying to make ends meet. It would never work. She slapped me lightly. God, you're even dumber than most. She couldn't give a shit about what you have. She doesn't need possessions or riches. She already has those. She needs a man who loves her in spite of all that. One thing I can be assured of, if you get together, it won't be because of her money or your perceived lack of it. You can give her what she desires most in this world, and it won't cost either of you a dime. She wants the love of a good man and a family. She's talked about children ever since we were in college. Man up, Jamie. Be the one. We waved as they left and went back into the house. Where are you staying? I know you sold the house. She seemed surprised. I'm staying with you, at least for a while. You don't mind, do you? I can get an extended stay suite somewhere if you do, but I'd really like to stay here. I want to surround myself with real, not the illusion I've been living with lately. Please. I thought about it for a minute, looking at her anxious face. Then I sighed. Yeah, you can stay. I guess I'll have to get used to one of the most beautiful women in the world hogging my bathroom. The sacrifices one makes for friendship. She slowly started grinning. I promised not to leave my panties hanging on the shower rod too often. I find myself very tired now, honey. Where do I sleep? Your bed, I hope? She was only semi-joking. I led her to the guest room. I had forgotten I'd made every piece of furniture in the room, from the dressers to the large canopy bed, all in light pecan. I'd learned to carve, and the posts of the bed were done in intricate patterns, vines and little flowers, mostly. There was even a vanity, the mirror in the shape of a heart. I'd made it with a little girl in mind. She wandered around, touching everything. Finally, she turned and smiled. What's her name? Huh. What's her name? You obviously designed this room for a daughter. I assume you had a name picked out?
Oh, no.
I always thought when I married, we would pick the name out together, something that appealed to both of us. It wouldn't be fair, otherwise. Tears welled up once again. She came over, grabbed me, and gave me a very, very nice kiss. I have the feeling you'll be an excellent father. Good night, Jamie. I stood and watched her for a second before telling her good night. Movement woke me. I looked at the clock. For in the morning, I wondered what I had heard until I saw her at the foot of the bed. I freaked for a minute before I remembered she was still in the house. Are you all right? In answer, she dove on the bed, soaking my shoulder with tears. No, I'm not all right. Can I stay here for a bit? I need to feel loving arms around me, at least for a little while. I'll go back to my room when I calm down. I pushed the covers back and she snuggled in, her head on my shoulder. She smelled great, and she felt wonderful. I went to sleep with my arm wrapped around her. I woke at 8 and she was still there, still snuggled tightly. She was still on my shoulder, and my other arm was wrapped around her waist, pulling her to me tightly. I lay and looked at her, thinking how beautiful she was without makeup, her hair spread out in a messy fashion. 15 minutes later, one eye popped open. How long have you been staring at me? A little while. And I wasn't staring, more like admiring. Jen grinned and stretched, sliding that sensuous body along my length. I popped hard instantly, and she felt it. She pushed me away, giggling. I'm ready for breakfast. We showered, separately, although the thought of that naked body just on the other side of that door did nothing to make my erection go down. I had to stand under the cold water while I had my shower, just to gain control. Jen had been busy. Pots and pans were everywhere. She wouldn't let me help, so I sipped coffee and admired her as she flitted from task to task. Jen had made crepes, and they were excellent. Where did you learn to do that? Paris. I spent 3 months in a compressed cooking course. We prepared dishes for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. One of the many reasons I was incommunicado. She cooked, so I cleaned up while she sipped coffee. I hand-washed the large items and prepped the rest for the dishwasher. Are you always this neat? Yeah, Uncle Sam taught me, and since I live alone, it's pretty easy to keep the place clean if you don't let things pile up. She changed subjects quickly. Why aren't you married, Jamie? You might as well wear a t-shirt that says, Prime Husband Material. Honestly, I haven't found anyone I loved enough to consider marriage. I'm like a lot of animals. I intend to mate for life, so I have to be damn sure. I was in love with a woman once, but nothing came of it. Why not? Because she was married to someone else. If I had pursued her, talked her into cheating her husband, it would have never worked. How could I trust someone who would do that to another who was supposed to be the love of her life? If she had, could I respect her? It's a shame because she was just about as perfect as a wife could be. Jen blushed, realizing I was talking about her. Then she grinned. What shall we do today? What do you usually do on Sundays? I usually go to church or go fishing. You go to church? That surprises you? Not really, although I've never heard you talk about religion. I usually don't, and I don't try to recruit others to my way of thinking. Is it too late to go? I checked the time. It's too late for Sunday school, but we have time to get there for the sermon, if you dress quickly enough. She giggled as she moved. I was a fashion model. There are professional quick change artists out there slower than me. 10 minutes, and you better be ready. I shaved and checked my closet, choosing an old suit, not wanting to wear one of Steve's and bring up memories. True to her word, she was ready before I was. She was dressed simply, a knee-length dress with a high neckline, but the woman could make a toe sack look good. Heads turned and conversation slowed. I was greeted by my friends and introduced Jen, and then the sermon started. I liked the preacher we had now quite a bit. He was a much calmer person than the one that preceded him. That guy was all hellfire and damnation. It wasn't long before we thought him unstable. He found out we were talking to the governing board about maybe transferring him and had a meltdown in the pulpit. The next sermon was almost impossible to understand, ending when he pulled a pistol out and started ranting about how we'd never replace him. It was a very tense 20 minutes before the cops got there. In force, an usher had slipped out and called them the minute the gun appeared. Negotiators were called, a SWAT team showed up, then the news media. 2 deputies were quietly crawling among the pews, getting the children out while the negotiator kept his attention. Another usher unlocked the back door and the police got close enough to taser him, waiting until he waved the gun in the air. A good thing, because when the juice hit him, he fired twice in reflex. Come to find it out, he was having a mental breakdown triggered by the death of his wife and a dependency on prescription drugs. The church managed to get the charges reduced and get him into rehab. He sent a nice long letter of apology later from his new posting in Africa, a place he volunteered to go to in atonement for his sins. You could look up if you're in the right pew and see the outlines of the patching over the bullet holes. The sermon was about marriage, commitment, and the pressures of modern living, and how to deal with it and stay firm in your commitment. Commitment to marriage should be second only to your commitment to God. Strong, loving relationships are the cornerstone of modern society, the place of strength after your faith in God. And just like God, you should always be there for your partner. I saw a lot of nodding and a lot of uncomfortable people. Jen seemed to be hanging on every word. Most people were surprised that as we filed out, he gathered Jen up into a big hug. Turning her loose, he grinned. "You don't remember me, do you? I'm Mike Flanagan, father. I don't have words to express how much your help has meant to our family. I speak of you often, telling people you are proof that angels walk on this earth." Jen was flaming red but smiled. "It was just a little thing I could do to help. How is your son doing?" "He's fine, in total remission. The surgeons seem satisfied they got it all. He's to the point he's back with the fire department, although they won't let him do anything strenuous yet." So this was the angel he spoke about so often. He told us about it, how his son was dying, and even as he prayed he was giving up hope when an angel appeared before him, telling him his son would be all right. Faster than he could understand, his son was on a medical jet to a major cancer center and in surgery in less than 10 hours. There was never any discussion of cost, and he never saw a medical bill. He called it a modern-day miracle. He thanked me for bringing her to church so he could finally express the gratitude he felt, asking if she lived nearby. Jen stepped in before I could answer. "I'm living with Jamie right now, Reverend. Unfortunately, it isn't in sin, but I'm working on it." The preacher got a little red but grinned. "Well, before it gets that far, think about my sermon today. I've never officiated at the wedding of an angel." Jen promised to give it serious consideration and she'd get back to him. I grinned at her as we drove home. "What? I've never slept with an angel before. I thought the glow last night was from my neighbor's street lamp. I have to say it was very nice." Jen colored slightly before grinning back. "Oh, I can be a real little devil when I backslide. That only happens when I'm in love. But when it happens, it burns hotter than any nuclear bomb ever detonated. What shall we have for lunch?" We stopped at the country club. I knew the chef, and they usually put on a pretty good buffet. Once again, a place went quiet when we entered. I figure sooner or later I'll get used to it. The food was excellent, and she surprised me with how full her plate was. Michelle came out and walked among the patrons, stopping at our table. Soon they were in a rapid-fire discussion I couldn't have kept up with if it was in English, much less the French they were speaking. He kissed her on both cheeks, told me he thought I was the luckiest man alive, and continued circulating. What was that all about? "Food, honey. We were speaking food. He really is quite good." I wondered about the honey comment, but let it go. We went home. Odd, me saying that, at least mentally, and she insisted I finish my rocking chair project. "I'm not here to disrupt your life. I have a few things to do, and maybe I'll join you. Maybe I can help, if you'll let me." She grabbed her laptop out of her vehicle and disappeared into the spare bedroom. I was almost finished dry fitting everything when she came into the shop 2 hours later. She sat on a stool and watched for a few minutes before coming over and giving me a hand. I was grateful for the help. Sometimes you needed 3 hands on these projects. When everything was in place, we stood back, her admiring it while I looked for flaws. The seat was a bit uneven on one corner, so before I glued everything up I'd have to fix that. One of the back spindles looked a little off, and I might have to adjust the length so it would seat better, but other than that it looked good. Jen helped as I gently took it apart, laying the pieces out on a long table. I took the seat over to the sander and adjusted it, then I measured the hole, took a little off the bottom of the spindle in question, and it was ready to glue up. I was going to stain the parts first. That way I could get a good even coat, and it would make the whole thing more durable. Not quite sure how dark to make it, I asked her opinion. What does the rest of the furniture in her house look like? Excellent question. Sarah had mostly upholstered pieces, but the few pieces of what I remembered had a medium tint. I got out 3 different stains and a scrap piece of wood, rubbing a bit of each on the board. Jen pointed to the lightest one without hesitation. This one. It'll make the grain of the wood really stand out. She wanted to help, but I discouraged it. Most beginners put too much on at one time, and it darkens it more than we want. Take the scrap piece and practice if you like, or watch me. Jen watched for a while, then grabbed a pair of rubber gloves and played with the scrap while I finished. There wasn't a bare spot left when she was done, but I had to admit she caught on quicker than most beginners. She glowed under my praise. 4 hours later, right before bedtime, I glued everything up and clamped the chair. In 24 hours, I would check the glue, and if I felt it was set, I'd take the clamps off. If not, I'd leave it at least another day. We went to bed separately, and I was so tired I didn't realize she had slipped in until I woke the next morning. She felt so good I just held her until I had to get up to make it to work on time. I grinned all day at work. Even the most aggravating subcontractor I had didn't bother me, which I think bothered him. My good mood lasted until I got home to find a really pissed-off female waiting for me. "Why didn't you wake me up? I thought you might like to sleep in. You need to let me do the thinking around here." One look at my face and she knew she had made a mistake. "I am sorry, honey. That came out all wrong. What I meant to say is that I wanted to get up with you. Maybe even cook you some breakfast. Is that so bad? I appreciate the thought. I live by myself, remember? I'm used to taking care of myself." Her frown deepened. "I understand. It's just that I like to pull my own weight. I don't want to be a burden." I eyed her, remembering the first few times I'd been around her. She could barely find her way to the kitchen and couldn't cook for diddly. Her maid did most of the meals for them. Something was starting to smell. Jen changed the subject. "Look, I made dinner." Well, by golly, she had, and it smelled great. She beamed when I told her. "It's not quite done. Another hour should do it." I took advantage of the time to go over the rocking chair one more time, deciding it was as done as it was ever going to get. I called Sarah. "Come by tomorrow and pick up your chair." She was so happy she was still gushing when I hung up. Dinner was excellent, probably the best meal I'd ever had. I noticed bouquets of flowers in random places, and she smiled. "I picked them out of your garden. I hope you don't mind. Pick all you want." I used them to bait pollinators in for the vegetables, but decided I liked them so much I seem to plant more every year. It's a shame, really. Lots just go to waste. I'm sure there are people out there who would enjoy a bunch from time to time. The next day she went to a craft store and bought a bunch of vases and some ribbon. She called Jan first, outlined her idea, and Jan immediately endorsed it. She was in the garden when I got home Friday with 5-gallon buckets and garden shears. Every bucket was filled with flowers. She waved me over. "I hope you were sincere when you said you wished others could enjoy the beauty of your flowers." I called in a pizza because we're going to be too busy to cook. "Now, if you'll finish the buckets, I'll start arranging." There were 25 vases, and she must have had some experience because she crafted the flowers beautifully. There were African daisies, different colors of zinnias and cosmos, and in the center, towering over them all, a sunflower. I tried to help but gave up pretty quickly, limiting my contribution to filling the vases with water and packing them carefully into the boxes she had bought when she was finished arranging them. 2 hours later, we were finished and had flowers sitting all over the house. The smell was almost overpowering, especially if you mixed it with the pizza. Dinner done, showers over. We sat on the couch, she with a glass of wine, me with a ginger ale. I think I've been pretty good at holding it in, but what in the world are you going to do with all these flowers? I'm not going to do anything with them. We are going to the hospital tomorrow and give them out, starting in the children's ward. Please say you'll help me. Not how I envisioned spending my Sunday, but the look she gave me made me feel like I'd be kicking a puppy if I said no. All right. She just glowed. There was no other way to describe it. She slid into my arms and snuggled for a while. I dozed off, and she woke me saying it was time for bed. I stumbled into my bedroom, not realizing she was right behind me. She slipped off her robe and twirled, making the translucent gown she had on rise. I got a microsecond view of 2 very nice cheeks before it settled down. Bed. We're going to need our sleep. It took me a little while to calm down enough to go to sleep. She snuggled, feeling the iron bar between us, before giving me a nice kiss. She was out in seconds. It took me an hour to get to sleep. We went to church again the next morning, and I saw Jen in a pretty serious discussion with the preacher. I was wondering what it was about when he handed her a paper. After lunch at the country club, where I had to listen to a 20-minute conversation in French, we were home. Jen teared up a little when I pulled Steve's truck out of the shed I kept it in, but was smiling by the time we got the flowers loaded. There were 25 vases and I figured we'd just dump them at the nurse's station and leave. Wrong, wrong, wrong. There were also a bunch of stuffed toys and I wondered what that was about. 3 nurses and Jan met us at the door, rushing out to help carry the flowers and animals in, giggling and talking a mile a minute. Jen pulled out the list the preacher had given her and started prioritizing. After the first stop, I was ready to go home. She was 5 years old, and she was dying. The nurse told us she liked horses, and Jen had a unicorn among the stuffed animals, so she got that out for her. There was no one in the room when we got there. Apparently, the parents were divorced because of the pressure of the situation and wouldn't be in the same room at the same time. So she went long periods without any company at all. I was beyond furious when I heard that. If she was my child, you couldn't have blown me out of her room with 5 pounds of C4. Despite the bald head and the frail frame, the child was all smiles that she got visitors, along with a unicorn, and flowers. Jen told her that I'd raised them, and she asked if she could come see them when she got out. We both promised she would be more than welcome. I got up abruptly and walked back to the station, taking a bouquet apart and weaving a garland for her head, something my mother had taught me when I wasn't much more than the child's age. Jen looked up sharply when I walked back in, but smiled through tears at the reaction of the child when I snugged the garland around her head. We had to take pictures of her with both of us, and a nurse who came in to check her vitals told her she would print a couple out for her to enjoy. I still have one of me holding her carefully while she snuggled to both of us. I took it out once in a while after she passed, and remembered we were able to give her at least one good day. We were planning to spend about 15 minutes with her before moving on, but we stayed an hour, until her medication put her to sleep. Jen took 10 minutes, redoing the makeup that had run from her tears. I just wiped my eyes and told the nurses I had allergies. We gave out 9 more bouquets to children, then switched to senior citizens. The child ripped my heart out, but the sight of those old people, many of them alone in this world, weeping with gratitude to be seen as a person, broke it into little pieces. One 94-year-old woman cried like a baby while she snuggled the stuffed sheep she had picked, then hugged us as hard as her frail body would allow. I thought we were done until Jan brought us to the nursery. The sight of all those babies finally caused Jen to melt, coming into my arms and weeping great tears, no doubt thinking of Steve and their missed opportunities. When she finally recovered, Janice asked if she'd like to come and volunteer, rocking babies who had no one. She said it did the children good to be held, and it helped with their development. Why don't the parents rock them? Some of these children get left here by their mothers, unable to care for them. Others may have a single mother with dependence issues. Some are born and have to go through drug withdrawal immediately. Those are the ones that really need to be held. Jen said she would be there Monday morning. It was a quiet ride home. Jen got into sweats, dragged a pillow and blanket to the sectional, and demanded I snuggle with her. Emotionally wrung out, we both went to sleep, waking up just in time for a light supper and back to bed. I didn't even comment when she shrugged out of her sweats and climbed into bed in just her panties. We went right back to sleep. She made sure she was up early enough to make me breakfast, a breakfast she made while wearing just a t-shirt and panties. It was a great view and brightened my day considerably. I thought about it as I ate my bagged lunch. I knew she was sending me a message, but I was on the fence. A love affair with her would be stuff dreams are made of, but I had to be realistic. She was worth millions, a lot of millions. I made 62 grand on a good year and lived in a manufactured house. It was a nice house and I'd upgraded it quite a bit, but it would never be the mansion she was used to. I was pretty sure if we lived together as a couple, cracks would start to appear, and I couldn't get over her history of just disappearing if things got stressed. I would never be able to handle that. I decided the best thing we could do was air everything out, my expectations and fears, as well as hers. That plan did not get a chance to work, because when I got home, it was to a very pissed off Jen. Your girlfriend came by today. I don't know who was more surprised, her or me. She apparently got in from her business trip a little early and came by to surprise you. Well, surprise. I took a deep breath. Jin, why are you so upset? Did you think I lived like a monk, pining for something I could never have? I live in the real world, honey. I can't just disappear if things don't suit me and just pop up months later like I was never gone, let alone expect people to accept it. Shocked did not even describe the look on her face. I told you I was mourning and trying to get my life back on track. Yes, it was rude and thoughtless to disappear on you and my friends, but I have a habit of not thinking things through. If I had, I would have never married Steve or met you. That shocked me. I thought they were deeply in love. She saw the look on my face. That didn't come out right. I did love Steve. A lot. But I figured out pretty quick that Steve was a pretty selfish guy. Yes, he loved me. But he loved the thought of his beautiful ex-model wife on his arm at business functions just as much. I was his validation that he had made it in some way. I made it very clear I wanted a family, but after being put off for 2 years, I realized I was going to have to force the issue. I found out something interesting while I was going through his papers after he died. He'd had a vasectomy a year after we married. I suspect he was going to get tested, show me he was shooting blanks, and maybe I would forget the whole thing. It wouldn't have worked, because I remembered how paranoid he was about precautions while we dated. After I read that, I realized that we'd have eventually drifted apart. I had to think about that for a bit. I knew Steve was selfish, but I didn't think he was that selfish. I am so sorry, Jin, for you and the fact that a man who was my friend would do something like that. She sighed. What are you going to do about your girlfriend? I'm going to call her. Then I'll probably go see her. She's been gone on a training course for 3 months. It was in England. She's a lot like you in many ways. Oh, she's pretty, but she'll never be as beautiful as you. She's a successful woman making it in a male-dominated profession. She's the very first female the company thought enough of to send to that course. She'll probably make VP in 3 or 4 years if she stays on track. I'll bet she works for peanuts while the men make a killing. Actually, she makes more than most and almost twice as much, or better, a year than I do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to shower and change. I'll probably be late getting home. Do you remember how to set the security system? Her reply was to flounce out to her car and drive away. Angie had more than few ruffled feathers. How long has she been staying with you? A couple of weeks. I figure another 2 or 3 and she'll be gone. I'm like a touchstone to her. Plus, I look a lot like her deceased husband. Is she looking for a clone? I know who she is. Anyone who's ever read a fashion magazine knows who she is. I figured she'd be wrinkled and gray by now, but she looks better than my baby sister, and she's 23. Are you sleeping with her? I think I dodged that bullet pretty well. I'm not having sex with her if that's what you're asking. Bet she's loaded. How much is she worth? I have no idea. I've never asked and she's never said. How much are you worth? That was kind of a sore subject. I had a rough idea what she made and her house was a McMansion. She liked showing me off at business functions, dressed in one of Steve's expensive suits, but she didn't like what I did. She was in banking and told me flat out I needed to quit my job and go into making custom furniture. She even had the financing lined up. I shocked her when I said no. I just wasn't comfortable with that. My parents had struggled all their lives and ended up with nothing. I didn't want that to happen to me. Our relationship was strained for a while, but got back on track just before she went on her trip. She wisely changed the subject and we went out to dinner, then back to her house for a serious round of makeup sex, trying to catch up from our time apart. It was so exhausting I stayed the night. When I got home, Jen was gone. I just shrugged. I would miss her. It was 8 weeks before I saw her again. It was at a funeral for the little girl who had cancer. The cruel disease finally defeated her. Her mother said she died in her sleep. I didn't know she had passed until a little white-haired lady showed up at my door. Hi, you don't know me, but you know my granddaughter Julie. May I have a minute of your time? I brought her in, sat her on the couch, fetched her a glass of tea and a piece of cake. She smiled at the old-time hospitality. Your parents must have raised you right, Jamie. They tried. She had the saddest smile I'd ever seen. I think most of it stuck. I've got bad news, son. Julie passed last night in her sleep. She knew she was going to die, and she begged me to ask you something if she did. Her last request in this world was to ask if you'd weave a band of flowers for her to wear to heaven. It hit me hard. I developed a habit of harvesting the flowers once a week and taking them to the hospital, where Jan and the nurses would arrange them. I'd always stop to see Julie, and she'd always smile at me. She had a few toys around, and it seemed she loved puzzles. One day I stopped to see her, but she was having a treatment. I knew she'd be worn out by the time she got back, so I didn't stay. Her unicorn was on her dresser, propped up on a bouquet of my flowers. I took about 8 pictures with my cell phone. The next day, I went to a professional photographer and told him what I wanted. He picked the best 2 photos and blended them, changing the focus slightly until the flowers seemed to glow. He printed it off on special stock. I spent every minute after I got home from work the next week, making a puzzle that fit into the custom frame I'd built. It had 80 pieces and I assembled them into the frame, carefully gluing the photo to the pieces. It was a big puzzle for a 5-year-old. But the pieces were pretty big and she seemed pretty smart for her age. When it's set, I took a utility knife and carefully separated every piece, cutting from the back to assure crisp lines. After that, I gave them a light coat of acrylic to bind them even harder. Then I assembled it a couple of times to make sure everything fit. I gave it to her in a big bag with no instructions. It took her 3 days to figure it out. Her mother told me she cried with joy when she saw what the puzzle was. Now she was gone. Just before she left, her grandmother handed me an envelope. She wanted you to have this. I wrote it out for her, and she copied it in her own hand. Something to remember her by. I'd remained pretty stoic while she was there, but when I was alone and opened the note, I'm not ashamed to say I cried the tears of the brokenhearted. You could just barely make out the childish scrawl, but the words hit me hard. Mr. Jamie, thank you and Miss Jen for the flowers and the unicorn and the puzzle. You are my friends and I love you. Julie. The next morning I stripped about 2/3 of my flower beds, saving the very best for her garland. The rest I took to a florist friend of mine and had him arrange the flowers as her casket spray. My last chance to give her flowers. I went to visitation that night. Julie lay like a little angel in a white dress, my garland around her bald head. I thought I held it together pretty well until I noticed the purple horn just below her right hand. It was her unicorn. In the left, turned up so I could see it, was a disc of a sunflower, the centerpiece in her puzzle. Many thought I was the father the way I cried. Janice was there, came up and hugged me, then led me gently away. There in the corner was the mother, wrapped up in the arms of someone who looked familiar. She looked up and smiled at me through her tears. It was Jen. She motioned for me to sit on the other side of the mother, and when she saw who it was, she transferred her tears to my shoulder. Jen got up quietly and walked away. I didn't see her again that night. I was a pallbearer, one of 4. It was devastatingly, heartbreakingly light, as only the casket burying the dreams of a child could be. The spray made from my flowers covered the whole casket. By now, many of her mother's friends knew they were from me, and they all wanted to thank me. I think I got more hugs that day than at any time in my life. I sat with the other pallbearers during the funeral, but at the graveside service, I stood in the back. The preacher spoke of the love of God and how all things happened for a reason before he commended her soul to her maker. I just stood, numb, when a hand slipped into mine and another took my arm. I automatically wrapped that arm around the person hugging me, looking down at the grief-racked face of Jen. She didn't look like a supermodel just then, but she looked more human than at any other time I'd ever seen her. I saw the expensive casket, the way the service was put together, and knew who paid for the funeral. Julie's mom was barely scraping by, and her father had disappeared. I walked Jen to my truck when they started lowering the casket, shoving a big bunch of flowers in her hand. This is our last chance to give her flowers. Coming. We walked back slowly. Janice, Sandy, Melody, and 3 of her nurses waited, and after each was given a handful of flowers, we dropped them into the grave one by one until they were gone. Goodbye, Julie. Heaven is a better place now that you're in it. I hope you can run and play, and that it is fields of flowers with unicorns roaming in them. I said it quietly, but most heard me, and it set off a fresh round of tears. 3 days later, I got home to find a Mercedes SUV in my drive. I wondered who among my friends could afford one of those when Jen got out, looking as timid as I'd ever seen her. Can I come in? I let her in, and she automatically went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. As it brewed, she sat with an expression I couldn't read. I need to say some things. and I need for you to not interrupt until I'm done. All right? I just nodded. First, let me apologize for disappearing again. I had this whole fantasy constructed around us. I thought I'd walk back into your life, and you'd welcome me with open arms, and we'd live happily ever after. Then the reality hit me. I disappeared, and you hadn't stopped living your life. You had responsibilities, you had a life, you had a girlfriend. Boy, that one hit me hard. You guys still seeing each other?
No.
Why? It wasn't over me, was it? I'll call her and explain if it would help. It wasn't over you. Not directly, but you did have an impact.